Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a quick look at the USS Regent, Cryptic's latest offering in the Z store. It is a Sovereign-class retrofit with two interesting little toys. The first is the wide-angle quantum torpedo launcher. Essentially, it's a fairly standard quantum torp, 2 damage modifiers, 1 accuracy, 1 crit chance, and an arc modifier, which means that it now fires on 180 degrees forward instead of 90 degrees forward, which makes it much more useful. You also get the Metreon gas canisters, which, for want of a better term, boils down to explosive warp plasma. We'll come back to that later. Take a note of the numbers, by the way. Those are simply baseline. There are various skills and consoles you can use to rack those up quite considerably in the case of the damage. The bridge officer layout's a little on the unusual side. So Commander Engineering, Lieutenant Engineering is what you'd expect on a cruiser. Lieutenant Commander Tactical we haven't seen since the Excelsior. Ensign Tactical, well, fair enough. You need to slap the tactical team somewhere, I suppose. And Lieutenant Universal. I have to wonder about this because, of course, there's no dedicated science station. So, while I'm sure people are going to come out with some interesting builds as time rolls on, I suspect initially people will just put anyone in there so long as they're wearing blue. Aesthetically, right. I will be honest here, I am not a fan of the standard paint job. While the black and white zebra scheme had its place, particularly on the Odyssey, that wasn't too bad. And it's not too bad on the dorsal view either. The ventral view, oh my god. Who thought it was going to be a good idea to just slap on what looked like random hull panels? Let's change this up. Get it looking a bit more... It makes even less sense, because of course then you can see that the black paint job is actually hiding quite a bit of texture detail. And that just leaves you thinking, well, why? In terms of overall look, it's very obviously intended to be a mashup between the Sovereign and the Odyssey. Of course, if you're feeling less forgiving, you could describe it as the unholy love child of the Sovereign and the Odyssey, or a Frankenstein's monster, or generally things that were not meant to be. I'll admit it's a bit of a grow on me, but I do not like the forward-swept pylons. So let's switch in the Sovereigns for a second. Could go with the others, but I've never been a fan of those. So Sovereign pylons allied to Regent for everything else. Yeah, that looks a bit better. Ditto, you can go with Sovereign everything and just keep the Regent's nacelles, which again doesn't look too shabby. It's very obviously another halfway house without the whole weird ridge design on the engineering hull. Now, that's not too bad. It's a bit shorter than the Regent and a bit taller. You'll see, particularly if you put the two saucers side by side, the Regent's saucer is longer but flatter. It looks like somebody sawed off the top 6 decks or so and just bolted it onto the front instead. Yeah, there you go. So actually that's not too shabby either, except that the shuttle bay doesn't mix too well. Can we get a look at that? Yes, we can. Anything trying to take off or land out of the saucer's shuttle bay is either going to have to come into a really bizarre angle, or is going to leave and basically take a ski jump off the engineering hull. Which, I don't know, if it worked for the Royal Navy, it could work for Starfleet. I have to note as a criticism that you can't mix and match the parts as well as you can with other ships. The neck section just does not work. You can see there that there's a really odd cut between the ridges on the Regent's engineering hull where it meets the neck and any other kind of neck. So if you're going to go with a Regent engineering hull, you kind of have to go with the Regent neck, and it's very much the same in the other direction. So you will often find yourself going with, well, basically, if you want something that doesn't look like it was cut and shunted, You're going with Sovereign Everything plus Regent Nacelles, or Regent Everything and Sovereign Pylons. Those are the only two combinations I found that didn't leave me immediately scrambling the ship back into the dock to change things up again. I could live with the double ridge on the Regent Engineering hull, except that that's kind of doesn't make sense, because it happens in the Odyssey because of the split neck design. In the Regent, where they've got a solid neck, and in fact they're moulding it straight into the engineering hull, there's no good reason to have the split. However, that with the veteran skin doesn't look too shabby at all. From a numbers standpoint, it's fairly standard cruiser fare, if a little more aggressive than usual with 3 tactical consoles. 39,000 hull is pretty much baseline. However, those of you who have been watching the Tribble Time Warp will remember that for a few days on Tribble, the shipyards contained a little something called the Fleet Assault Cruiser refit. Notice the differences, ladies and gentlemen. 4 tactical consoles, upgraded hull and shields, and I suspect you can ignore the bridge officer layout. That will probably stay the same, so Lieutenant Engineering rather than Lieutenant Tactical. On to the Riker manoeuvre. You'll remember the base numbers from the console weren't all that impressive. However, you can upgrade these. Particle Generator's skill will improve the damage quite considerably, and Graviton Generators improves the snaring effect. So, let's see what we get. Now, at the moment that's doing 3,047 damage, rather than the 2,000 base on the console. Bear in mind, however, that being a science captain, I have got points sunk into the particle generator skill. In fact, specifically, I've got 6 ranks of it. So let's just double check. Yeah, there we go. 6 ranks in Graviton, 6 ranks in Particle. Could boost that higher if I was so inclined. I just didn't think it was worth an extra 6,000 skill points at the time. And honestly, for one console, again, I wouldn't necessarily be convinced. However, if we slap in a console particle generators, or 2 of them, let's see what that does. 3,497.4. So extra 15%, give or take, 16%. Not too shabby. Turns out plasma infusers also boost it. So 3 of those in, and hey, 4,172 damage. So if you're willing to go with plasma weaponry, rather than phasers or disruptors or anti-protons or whatever else takes your fancy, then this console gets a little bit of a boost and you get to double dip. If you just dump the particle generator consoles, just roll with the infusers, which, let's face it, is more likely. Yeah, 3,700. Those are white consoles. So if you're willing to cough up for the high grade stuff in the Mark 12s, you can probably boost that up to 4,000 damage. Admittedly, of course, that's assuming you've taken the skills in particle generators as a character. Well, hey, it might be worth it. It's not like I had points in much else. So, I don't have some high-grade plasma weapon. We'll just stick the phaser relays back in. And one other detail that I did notice was with regard to the wide-angle torpedo tube. Look at the base thing, quantum torpedo, 90-degree targeting arc, etc, etc, etc. Now look at the forward torpedo, the wide-angle one, quantum torpedo, 180-degree firing arc. This is a key point. It does rather suggest that the game simply regards arc as being another modifier. So ultraviolet gear may well include arc modifiers in the future, if of course Friend Computer allows it. Now then, let's get into space and actually test up the Metreon cloud. Purists will of course be happy to note that it's emerging from the front of the nacelles as per Insurrection. Cannon has been maintained. Weapons fired detonates it. You have to wait several seconds. You actually have to finish deploying the cloud before you can detonate it, which can cause problems later on. You'll see that he was using hazard emitters. There's a reason for that. We were trying to work out whether or not the Metreon burn was actually a burn effect in the traditional sense rather than just a series of plasma impacts. Turns out it's just a series of plasma impacts. So there is no dot to be cleared with hazard emitters or similar. Which kinda settles one thing that we were wondering about in Fleet Chat from looking at the console, because of course it just says 5 hits over 5 seconds. There had been some speculation that it was in fact a hazard emitter's clearable plasma fire a la heavy plasma torp. No, it isn't. There's also a metron gas immunity buff that it gives you when it detonates, which is odd. It's very short-lived. We assumed in the end that it was just immunity to the snare. Now it turns out Potsy also has the console, and for those of you who are wondering about his ship costume, that's the Imperial class, which was on the C-Store for quite some time. Not anymore, it has to be said. Originally that was going to be the refit, but they came up with the Regent skin instead. Now I'm going to preemptively trigger hazard emitters the moment I see his phasers hit the cloud. There we go, and there go hazard emitters, and first explosion in, and as you can see hazard emitters, despite being a debuff cleanse, has had precisely sweet 0 effect. It's also worth noting that I'm using Mako Mark 11 shields in this test. I've got fairly decent plasma resist. It still pretty much stripped the aft shield, which led to some speculation on our part about whether or not you could use mines and high yield combinations as a 1-2 punch. Well, mines you're fine on, because it turns out that this cloud does not do friendly fire at all. Look at the top, Potsy's shield has done absolutely nothing, hasn't even cared. My port shield is pretty much shot, and that basically says it all really. You can dump mines into the cloud and essentially use them as a 1-2 combination, particularly since of course dispersal patterns now work with tricobalt mines. Let the fun begin, ladies and gentlemen. The only downer of that of course is that the cloud takes several seconds to become detonatable, and you may very well find that your mines detonate before the cloud does, so you need to watch your timing. On the subject of going off prematurely, weapons fire will also prematurely detonate the cloud. AoE attacks are particularly prone to it, but hostile weapons fire will touch it off as well, which makes it a real pain to use effectively in PvE. However, the gas blast does trigger the whole cloud, and as I said, fortunately, no friendly fire, so you won't blow yourself up by doing the Spaceborne equivalent of running around with a leaking can of petrol and a trail of flame slowly catching you up behind you. And so we come to the critical point. To buy or not to buy, that is the question. Particularly when the blasted thing costs $25, €22, 50, or if you'd rather spend somebody else's money, about 450,000 to $500,000 dilithium, depending on what the exchange rates are doing. Right, so under what circumstances would you be buying this ship? Well, if you're chasing a heavy damage broadside cruiser, then this is not a bad buy at all. 3 tactical console slots, a wide arc torpedo launcher that allows you to just park on the broadside and go to town on your targets, and an upgraded version of eject warp plasma. They actually share a cooldown as it happens, that you can then set a match to blow away a shield arc on multiple targets. Isn't too shabby a deal in and of itself, particularly since you can use the universal bridge station and go absolutely hog wild on weapon power, so you can mix up high yield torpedoes, scatter volleys, dispersal patterns, take your pick. Of course that does leave you with no science officers, so you're going to be relying on your friendly neighbourhood boys in blue to bail you out. Better be polite to us next time we're in the bar, Mako, please take note. The further you go from that, the less of a good idea this ship becomes. The wide-angle torpedo is nice for any heavy cruiser, but if you're just buying this ship for that, then I'd have to question whether you'd want to pay anything more than about $5 or $10. In truth, I start umming and ahhing for the whole package once it starts getting up to $15, because frankly, things like this are supposed to be micro transactions, Cryptic. They're supposed to be spare change. Stuff that isn't even a rounding error on your bank account. So $25 to me doesn't come under that heading. That's a couple of decent indie games on Steam. It's a decent AAA expansion pack. I'm not sure what Pandora is going to be going for, or what Dawnguard is going for at the moment. I haven't looked those up. But it's too much for this ship, even if you're looking at this ship set up in a biz and going, I want. I have a suspicion, only that, and it's almost entirely ungrounded, except for the way that attack power on the wide-angle torpedo was appearing in my weapons display, that we will be seeing more arc-enhanced torpedoes, particularly at ultraviolet level in the fleet provisioning system. So I wouldn't buy it for that. I'd hang on and wait to see what came into fleet provisioning first. The skin is always going to be an aesthetic matter. I will simply note that I did wind up changing the pylons back to the Sovereigns, so again I'd consider that frankly a $5 deal. Don't get me wrong, it's nice. As a halfway house between the Sovereign and the Odyssey, I quite like it, and this is coming from somebody who doesn't like the Odyssey, which personally I consider to be bloated, quite frankly. But, yeah. If I hadn't been intending to review this, I wouldn't have bought it. It's that simple. If I'd been looking for something for my tactical captain as a cruiser, I'd have given this a look, I'd have ummed and ahed, and then frankly I'd have waited for the price to come down, be it by sale, or by saving up the dilithium, or by something else, anything. If you've just hit Vice Admiral on a character and you've still got that ship token, I think Veterans 600 day plus can get a C-Store variant free as a one-off. You can't replace it if you discharge it, of course. Then I would seriously consider this ship if I could have a do-over on that, especially for my tactical captain. But $25. No, not for $25. Maybe for 15, because that's getting down towards pocket change. Certainly for 10, and individual bits like the BOF layout and the hull itself for maybe 5 or 750. Yeah, I'd seriously consider those. But Cryptic, 25 is overpriced, even for the whole package. At any rate, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching. You now know my opinions on Cryptic's latest ship, and if there is a next time, I'll see you then.